DFS. It is Friday, October 15th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 6 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola, and this podcast is sponsored by our partners at Fanshare Sports. Fanshare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at fansharesports.com. Jared, I'm in this chair with arms on it, so I keep putting my elbows down, and I feel like I'm getting hunched up. So let me know if I look too tense during any of these picks. I don't want to look like I'm delivering any single pick too hard because, we got to make sure that we massage these lineups to fit our different contests.
I think you look great. Let's hope your picks are as good as you look tonight.
Thank you. I'll get relaxed. I hope my forehead's not too shiny. But for those of you listening, forget about it. My shoulders are hunched, and I'm serious about every pick. Jared, let's get to the cash quarterbacks here. And there are a lot of injuries getting in the way of all the picks. And I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of them at every position. But let's start out with cash quarterback and see what you have for the people.
Yeah, I don't know how you can set a lineup right now. If you're playing, we need to wait to get some of these updates on Sunday morning, hopefully, on a bunch of these guys. I mean, Taylor Heineke was my cash game quarterback 12 hours ago. Love the spot against Kansas City. Has the highest total of the week. Chiefs defense, bottom 3 in basically any metric you look at. And Heineke has been a good fantasy quarterback. He struggled last week against the Saints, which was kind of predictable, a tough matchup. But Heineke had 23 plus DK points in each of the 3 games before that. But now Terry McLaurin's iffy for this game with a hamstring. It does sound like he's going to play. That he had a tight hamstring on Friday, and they just wanted to be cautious with him and hold him out of practice. Washington's also missing 2 O-linemen, though. And again, it's the Chiefs, so I don't know how much it matters. The matchup's so good. I don't know if the Chiefs can take advantage, but I guess if McLaurin ends up playing on Sunday, Heineke will likely be my cash game quarterback. If not, I think the pivot for me would be up to Lamar Jackson for $7,300. You have to kind of change your whole lineup around, going up to that tier of pricing. But I didn't think he's the next best play behind Heineke.
I really like, too, how DraftKings lets you build those lineups without entering into something. So you can set that, lineup where you have to change more than just the quarterback and have either option ready for you. That's not available on FanDuel, is it? Or did I just not find it?
Not that I know of, but I spend a lot more time on DraftKings. So
I've looked around for it because it seems like it should be prominent. I don't know why you wouldn't have it in there. If anything, it would seem like it would make somebody play more. But yeah, Taylor Heineke, it's supposed to be Taylor Heineke week. And on Friday, Terry McLaurin of all people comes down with an injury, and it's a hamstring of all injuries. It's not like his quad was a little sore. He's got a glute pull. His neck was iffy because he slept wrong. It's a hamstring. That's the scariest injury for any wideout, especially a speed guy. So, we'll see. Of course, they used the catchphrase now, an abundance of caution, which I don't really know what that means. It's you're either being cautious or you're not. So we'll see if Terry McLaurin plays. Certainly if he plays, makes a big difference with Taylor Heineke. And I think we'll be watching the reports on him Sunday. If it gets to that day and it's like, yeah, he's fine. It was tight on Friday. Saturday was feeling better. Today he said he's feeling nothing, so he's ready to play. Or if it's like he's going to test it out pregame and then we'll see how it goes. Those could be 2 different things because he could play the game and still be very iffy. So we'll see where that goes for Taylor Heineke. I think Daniel Jones also available as a fallback at $5,500. He's only $100 more. He's been cleared from his concussion. So that, on the other hand, is not the kind of injury I think that we need to worry too much about re-injury on. I think for Daniel Jones's sake, he should be using an abundance of caution about deciding whether to play this Sunday. But if he's in there, I'm going to go ahead and trust that he'll be all right. Joe Burrow, I think at $6,300 is also in play for cash. If you're like me and you're scared to spend that much for Lamar Jackson on a cash quarterback and, handcuff yourself at the other positions. And then I think Matthew Stafford's probably about as high as I'll go price-wise in a cash lineup without having built it out yet. I'll see if I can get somewhere comfier. But $6,700, Matthew Stafford tops our QB dollars per point for DraftKings this week. Maybe he goes lighter on volume because they handle the Giants easily, but I think if he does that, he'll probably throw a couple touchdowns on the way.
Yeah, I think Daniel Jones being back helps Stafford a little bit, just, makes the Giants more likely to stay in that game. So yeah, I was surprised to see Stafford topping our dollars per point projections. We do have him projected for 300 plus yards, so he gets that bonus. So that's helping his DraftKings projection. But yeah, I agree with Daniel Jones too. I think if you make a Heineke lineup and love it, Jones is like the easy pivot where you can just go down to him and keep the rest of your lineup the same.
Mm-hmm. GPP side, I think Matthew Stafford looks like he might show up as a sneakier option over there as well. The Giants are so bad in coverage. They're among the top 8 in our adjusted fantasy points allowed for both wideouts and tight ends. So I think there's some double stack appeal with either Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods and Tyler Higbee to kind of differentiate from anybody else using those wideouts. And it doesn't look like Matthew Stafford's going to carry high ownership.
Yeah, that Giants-Rams game is like the one where we've actually gotten good injury news over the past couple of days. So that game's become more interesting to me for tournaments. Really stacking either side. More likely the Rams with a Sterling Shepard or a Kadarius Toney bring back on the Giants side. So I like that one. I still like the Washington-Kansas City game for tournaments. We got to see about McLaurin. We got to see about Tyreek Hill. Those guys need to be in there if that game's gonna deliver, I think. So I'm interested in Heineke and Mahomes in tournaments. And then Justin Herbert, like I wasn't kidding when I said last week I'm going to play him in tournaments every week. The Chargers are this year's Bills to me, where just the way they play and how aggressive they are, it's going to help the Chargers and it's going to help their opponents put up points too. I just think there's going to be a lot of high scoring games involving the Chargers.
And it's just so easy to believe in Justin Herbert every time you watch him play. It works. I agree. My primary pool, I think, Matthew Stafford's in play, but I think my primary pool for quarterback on the tournament side is Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes for that ultimate ceiling potential. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, I think, depends on Tyreek Hill being in there, but his situation seems kind of opposite from McLaurin's, where McLaurin was fine all week, and then Friday he hits us with the hamstring. Tyreek Hill was out Wednesday, Thursday, practices Friday, and they're like, I look like Tyreek Hill. So, we'll see where things are Sunday. But assuming Hill's in there, I think that's the primary pool. And I want to throw out Aaron Rodgers, who I wouldn't say I'm excited about him in his spot, but anytime that he's coming in at really low ownership, he's just worth a look. I've seen it happen too many times where I'm like, I'm not playing Aaron Rodgers this week because I have these other guys. And then Aaron Rodgers is like 2% owned in tournaments and he throws 4 touchdowns against whoever he's playing.
Yeah, the ownership's interesting. I think my pushback on Rodgers would be he just hasn't been a ceiling quarterback this year so far. And the Bears just don't seem like a team that's going to, push a ceiling outing out of Aaron Rodgers. So, if I'm building 20 plus lineups, I'd probably get there. But if I'm only building 5 or 6 like I usually do, I probably won't get there Rodgers.
Yeah, he wouldn't be my primary guy. And those are all the reasons I feel like I usually give. I'm like, it doesn't sound an exciting matchup. He's been just okay. And then he goes and throws 4 touchdowns, and 3 of them are Davonte Adams. And you're like, well, I guess I needed those guys to win this particular tournament. Yep. So running back for cash, what are you playing?
I think the first decision is what do you do with these cheap? Well, I guess the first thing for me now is Kareem Hunt to me is a lock. Assuming we don't get a Sunday report that these injuries he's on the injury report where they're actually serious. I think he's going to be fine. If we don't get anything about him being limited Sunday, I think Hunt is a lock at 6,200. But then it's these cheap running backs. So Devontae Booker 5,400, Darrell Williams 4,900, and Khalil Herbert 4,600. I think they're priced pretty well, like where they should be. So none of them stand out as the clear best play. If I can get to Booker, I'd probably go there. I feel the best about his volume. I think, he's going to get almost every single running back touch for the Giants. He's capable in the passing game. The Rams run defense is not great. So I think you're going to get, at least 15 touches out of Booker. So he's my favorite among those 3. But if you do need the savings, I think Williams and Herbert are both nice plays at their prices.
Just got breaking news, by the way, from Jay Glazer saying that Cliff Kingsbury tested positive for COVID, so he's not going to be around for the Cardinals game. He wasn't going to be in my lineup anyway, but it'd be interesting to see how that might affect things for Arizona. I'm not sure how we could adjust who we're playing, and we'll talk about that matchup a little bit more. But I agree, you kind of have to start by looking at those cheap running backs and figuring out what you're going to do. I'm glad that none of them is $4,000 because it's annoying when a running back who's not that good, and I think all these guys qualify as not that good, is 4K, and you're like, well, I kind of have to play him some because if he scores a touchdown, then he's a kind of a must-own at that level. So 4,600 for Khalil Herbert, like you said, 49 for Darrell Williams, 54 for Booker. I think they all make sense. I think Herbert is the riskiest just because he's the least established. He's in the worst offense. I mean, we don't like the Giants offense, but It's better than what the Bears are throwing out there these days. So they're all in play. I'm not sure if I will land on any of them until I really build out lineups and see if I need to get down that far, because there's value at tight end and wide receiver and even quarterback that we already talked about. So you might not need to go down to those guys, but I do think that they all potentially fit. And I agree that Booker is kind of the safest bet for that touch count that we want. DeAndre Swift is also chiefly in the mix here. And, that's kind of a reason why I might not have to go down, because 6,300 for DeAndre Swift and his ceiling, it's not a 7.5K running back that makes it tougher to fit, more middle priced players at the position. We mentioned Thursday that the Bengals have seen the league's highest running back target share over expected this season. That's a stat according to JJ Zachariason. So, it just sets up as a good situation for DeAndre Swift, who has delivered as a PPR back throughout this season so far.
Yeah, Swift is a cash play until he gets into the 7,000s. I'm not sure why his DraftKings price hasn't risen more than it has.
GPP side, what do you like?
So I love Darrell Henderson. I was surprised to see his Fanshare ownership come in as high as it is. I think Kareem Hunt, that situation, and Fanshare hasn't really updated for that. Yeah, I think that's going to pull some ownership away from Darrell Henderson. I'm going to play some Henderson in tournaments. I think he'll end up around 10 to 15% owned. I think that's fine. Just the sorry, what'd you say?
No, sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done.
The volume he's gotten, how good that Rams offense is, and the matchup against the Giants. And then I think Zeke Elliott's flying under the radar too, coming in at 11% ownership. Since that week 1 game against the Bucs, and no one runs on the Bucs. Zeke has averaged 24 DraftKings points per game, 23 plus in 3 straight now. The Patriots defense has been tougher against the pass than the run so far. So that really should just push Dallas to, another run heavy game plan, which they've been doing anyways.
Yeah. I mean, the risk on Zeke is that he's not getting a whole lot of receiving, but he's getting a ton of rushing, and they're run leaning now. It's a matchup that should keep them on the ground plenty. And I mean, for New England's side, they'd probably rather have Dallas pushing the run game than throwing it to CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and everybody's favorite new tight end, Dalton Schultz. So yeah, there's plenty to like there, and the price is still good on Zeke Elliott as well, probably because he's not catching a whole bunch of passes. Really, I think there's a lot to mess with at running back. And what I was going to say is we have these ownership projections on Friday, but those are definitely something to check back on throughout the weekend, because by Sunday, they definitely a lot of times shift quite a bit. We have the late breaking news. We have the injuries come out on Friday afternoon after a lot of people have posted articles and done these podcasts. So there's going to be different talk about it. There's going to be different ownership projections here. I'm going to have to be checking to see where all these guys land come Sunday. I think one thing that I'm going to do is probably lean away from Darrell Williams, Devontae Booker, Khalil Herbert types in tournaments, because I think that they all will check in at fairly high ownership rates, and really all 3 of them could bust. I mean, no matter how many touches they get, there's a reason that they're all backups. So none of them is a given. And I think in that range, if you do want somebody at that price, JD McKissick could be a low owned pivot at $4,800. And, we talked about Terry McLaurin's injury. Even if McLaurin's in the game, Washington's dealing with plenty of other injuries. And if they fall behind the Chiefs, which is entirely possible, McKissick could get more involved, could see some target upside in that game.
I like that call. The other guy that stood out to me in that range of those cheap running backs is Javonte Williams at $5,000. And he's obviously a worse touch bet than Devontae Booker and Darrell Williams and Khalil Herbert, but his talent in the matchup against the Raiders, I think, Williams has a chance to outscore all those guys. And
we're waiting to see if Melvin Gordon's going to play, right? Did he come in questionable?
Yeah, listed as questionable. I think he's going to play, but who knows how big a deal the injury is.
Wide receiver for cash. What are you playing?
I'm going to go back to Keenan Allen, who's been mostly. I mean, he's been okay. He's put up double-digit DK points in every game, but it's been kind of frustrating if you've been playing Keenan, watching Mike Williams steal all or most of the fantasy points. Mike Williams too. We haven't even mentioned him yet, but he's questionable with his knee injury. It seems very questionable. He didn't practice all week, so if Williams is out, I think Keenan becomes close to a lock in cash for me. But $6,400 for a guy who is third among wide receivers in targets, 5th in our expected fantasy points. He's underachieved his volume so far. I don't think that's going to continue.
Yeah, he might be a buy in season-long fantasy right now. It's not. I haven't really thought about it. I guess because I'm so focused on how many fantasy points they're scoring out there, not realizing that Keenan Allen's not scoring at the rate we expected. But like you mentioned, third at the position in targets. So at $6,400, I mean that's a lock, especially in a matchup where they're probably going to be throwing the ball plenty. I also like Michael Pittman at $5,500, the number one wideout for the Colts. He has caught 6+ passes in 4 straight games now and still 5,500. A matchup that's not scary for anything against Houston. I was surprised that Houston's 9th in pass defense DVOA. I don't believe it. I think that that's going to change because I just don't see how they could stay at that point. I don't think they have the players to do that. Also, one more guy to mention. I think, Jared, you mentioned him on the Thursday pod, but this is where I'll entertain Amon-Ra St. Brown at $4,200. 8 targets in 2 straight games. I think when I was first looking at our lineup generator, I saw Adam Humphries sitting up there at 3,400. And I was like, Adam Humphries, huh? And then I saw Amon-Ra St. Brown at 42. I'm like, I think maybe I'll go for Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of Adam Humphries.
Yeah, I think he's in play. Hawkinson's still dealing with the knee injury. Quintez Cephas out. Tyrell Williams still out. So I think Amon-Ra is a nice target bet for that $4,200 price tag.
Mm-hmm. GPP side, what do you like?
I'm a glutton for punishment, so I'm going to go back to Odell Beckham here. He's down to $5,100, and no one's going to play him. He's projected at 2% ownership. I mean, last week was bad, but let's remember, he had 18 expected fantasy points in week 3 and 19 expected fantasy points in week 4. So the usage was there in his first 2 games back. Baker Mayfield didn't connect with him in that week 4 game enough, but the opportunity was there. So I'm going to take another shot in tournaments. I still think Beckham, has 20-point games in him this season.
What's the latest that we've heard on the weather forecast there?
Yeah, it's supposed to be windy, like 15 to 20 mile per hour winds is what I've seen. But I don't factor that in until Sunday. Mm-hmm. If we get to Sunday and it's like 20 mile per hour sustained, I'd probably get off those passing games, but we'll see.
Yeah, because that's what I was wondering about. I think that could just wind up being a sneaky game for upside if the weather looks okay when we get to Sunday. There's plenty of talent on both sides, Beckham, and then on the Arizona side, obviously, even without their head coach and apparently quarterback's coach as well. So I think that'll be a matchup to look at and a forecast to check. I usually don't pay a whole lot of attention to weather, even come Sunday, but that'll be one situation to watch. I also want to see, obviously, the Terry McLaurin, Tyreek Hill injuries that day. And I think at wide receiver, it affects Mecole Hardman's outlook a lot. Mm-hmm. I'll be curious to see, first, if Tyreek Hill's in there, we're expecting him to be, but if he's out, Mecole Hardman takes a huge step up because the one area in which we've seen him go off in his career has been when Tyreek Hill is out. And, maybe go off is not the right word, but that's when we've seen his target shares spike, is he can be there, step down, but fill in for Tyreek Hill in that role when he's not playing. So I'll be curious to see that. And I'll also be interested to see what Mecole Hardman's ownership projection is come Sunday morning, because if he's high in that regard, then he'll be totally off my radar.
Yeah, he's going to be high if Tyreek Hill's out. So I'd almost rather have Hill play than I think Hardman's a better tournament option.
Mm-hmm. Tight end for cash. It's kind of hard to not start with Ricky Seals-Jones, huh?
Yeah, it's RSJ for me, especially with the McLaurin news now. RSJ is basically Logan Thomas for $3,000. He's playing the same exact role. He's out there for every snap. He's running around on like 90% of the pass plays. He got 8 targets last week. So, that alone for the price makes him a good play. And then you get this matchup against Kansas City, which just makes him an even better play.
And it's, with some backups, you have to talk yourself into them being an 80% fill-in. But this guy has been a tight end for his entire career. Logan Thomas used to be a quarterback. So we're probably not really taking a talent drop-off from Logan Thomas to Ricky Seals-Jones. There's no stretch needed here. And even if he's 35% owned in a 50-50, or even when we get to the GPP side, even if he's high owned at $3,000, he can tank at $3K at high ownership and still not take you out of contention.
Yeah, so I wouldn't do this in cash, but in tournaments, I think you can play RSJ at tight end and then play Travis Kelce in the flex. Because Kelce, if we didn't have RSJ at 3,000, Kelce would be in play in cash for me this week because he's down to his lowest price of the season at $7,000. So I'm going to consider doing that in tournaments, in those Washington Chiefs game stacks, playing both of these tight ends.
Yeah, and I mean, especially when we're talking about Kelce, it's easy to make the case for him because he's a top 8 wide receiver perennially in fantasy points. So you can think of him as a tight end, but he definitely scores as a wide receiver one. And on the GPP side, even if I'm not playing, even if I want to get away from Ricky Seals-Jones here, it's going to be to try to get up to Kelsey at 7,000. There are other guys that you can use, but there's nothing exciting. There's nothing that I'm really pointing at as something that I want to play at high volume. It's either going down to RSJ or going up to Travis Kelsey.
Yeah, I'm with you for the most part there. I do think those are going to be the two highest owned tight ends. So I do think the guys in the middle are going to get left out a bit. I do think Mark Andrews is interesting. He didn't get a price bump because his big game came on Monday Night Football. We saw the upside last week, and the Chargers have been tough against wide receivers, but kind of just a middling matchup for tight ends. Football Outsiders actually has them 29th in tight end coverage. They just gave up the big game to David Njoku, of course. They gave up over 100 yards to Travis Kelsey. They gave up touchdowns to Darren Waller and Logan Thomas. So it definitely could be a game that the passing game is more focused on Mark Andrews than it is Marquise Brown.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, even if they throw to both of them, it's a fairly concentrated target tree. Although we'll see what role Rashad Bateman plays this week. Apparently he's going to play, not factoring him into anyone else's projection just yet, though. On defense, I'm starting with the Vikings at $2,900. I mean, Sam Darnold has been not very good for the past 2 weeks, especially last week against the Eagles. He threw 3 interceptions, so he's showed us that ultimate ceiling for the team defense against him. I think there are some other sneaky options as well for tournament use, but I'll let you throw out your any other defense picks.
No, yeah, it's Vikings for me in cash. They are second in sacks through 5 weeks. They're third in adjusted sack rate. And the Panthers have allowed the 6th most sacks, and they're 24th in adjusted sack rate. So it's one of the bigger, D-line, O-line mismatches of the week. And like you said, Sam Darnold can struggle when under pressure. So I like Minnesota for cash. I like Carolina on the opposite side of that game for tournaments, same exact price, just a good defense, and they're at home. So I like them. I kind of like the Chiefs too. I know they're horrible in real life, but if we're going to get, 50 Taylor Heineke pass attempts, like I like the guy, but he's probably going to turn it over a few times and probably take some sacks. So I think the Chiefs are a little interesting for tournaments only.
I think the Cowboys at 3,200 are also interesting. They're kind of sneakily priced in the middle there, and they don't stand out, but they could be looking at 40 to 45 Mac Jones pass attempts, which would be a similarly attractive thing. And the Cowboys have been playing much better than the Chiefs on defense so far. I think Arizona at 2,700 is also, somewhat sneaky. Arizona has been one of the better defenses in the league. No Nick Chubb for the Browns, obviously changes things a bit. I know they still have Kareem Hunt, but if they're that run heavy and they're missing one of their top 2 running backs, then it makes them a little bit more fragile. So I think some upside to Arizona in that matchup.
Yep, no Chandler Jones for them, which hurts, but I still think they're an option for tournaments.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to do it for this Week 6 DraftKings podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com to get more player recommendations. If you're a DS insider, then you can check out Jared's cash game picks as well as top GPP options from Corey Bushland. You can also mess around with our lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and FanShare ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free Draft Sharks Discord. You can find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. If you're with us on the stream, stick around. Jared and I will be right back to do the FanDuel side. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, October 15th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 6 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me again is Jared Smola, and this podcast is sponsored by our partners at FanShare Sports. FanShare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at FanshareSports.com. Jared, quarterback for cash on FanDuel this week. What do you like?
It's Lamar Jackson for me. That's one thing that hasn't changed over the past 12 hours. He's like one quarterback that hasn't been affected by injuries on Friday here. So $8,200. He pops as pretty easily the top value based on our projections on FanDuel. And we've seen him take a big step forward as a passer this season. I think he's going to have a big game on the ground on Sunday. We talked about it last week. This Chargers defense kind of invites you to run, and they didn't change that game plan against the Browns. And Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt both had big games. Chargers still won. The game plan was still good enough for the Chargers. So if we see the same thing here, Lamar should have a big game on the ground.
I think either Lamar Jackson or Justin Herbert works here. Herbert's a slightly cheaper. I don't think price is really a deciding factor between them. To me, Justin Herbert just feels a little bit safer, a little bit higher floor right now, but I definitely am not arguing against Lamar Jackson. Herbert gets a defense that just allowed Carson Wentz to throw for 400 yards. The second game that they've allowed 400 plus this season. I know that they were missing some cornerbacks against Derek Carr back in week 1, but it's been a softer than usual pass defense. I know that Mike Williams has the injury issue. If he's out, that hurts some, but we still have Keenan Allen. We still have Austin Eckler. So I think at least Justin Herbert remains a solid cash option in that scenario.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with Justin Herbert.
That's right. GPP side, what do you think?
Taylor Heineke here for me. And we'll have to watch the Terry McLaurin thing. That's key for Heineke. He needs McLaurin in there to have a chance at a tournament winning performance. But he's been a good fantasy quarterback. He's been productive 3 of his 4 games. He struggled last week against the Saints, but gets another soft matchup here against the Chiefs. Kansas City 31st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, 32nd in FanDuel points allowed to quarterbacks, 32nd in our adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks metric. So it is about as good of a matchup you could ask for.
Mm-hmm. If Justin Herbert's ownership projection stays in the single digits where it is right now, according to FanShare, he's going to become a primary option for me, whether Mike Williams is playing or not. I don't think he can get high enough ownership wise to not be an option at all. But if it, climbs to 10% or so, or is above any of these other guys, then he just falls back into the pool. But it's Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, all those guys are available. So I don't think anybody is going to, jump way ahead of the others in ownership. I think that whole pool is fine to pull from, and we'll see about the weather for that Arizona-Cleveland game as we head into Sunday. Maybe not having Cliff Kingsbury around is a knock on Kyler Murray and maybe chips away to ceiling a little bit, but it's kind of tough for me to bet against him just for coach missing.
Yeah, and if that lowers his ownership, that probably just makes him a better tournament play.
Yeah, we'll see if that happens. I mentioned Aaron Rodgers on the DraftKings show, and it's even easier to make a case for him here because he's cheaper at $7,700 against Chicago.
Yeah, good price, and like you said, he's always capable of a 4 touchdown game.
Mm-hmm. And the big draw to him is potentially very low ownership. Not a cash option for me, but I think a sneaky tournament potential quarterback. Jared, what do you like for cash at running back?
So on FanDuel, Darrell Williams is the cheapest among these, fill-in running backs. He's cheaper than Khalil Herbert, cheaper than Devontae Booker. And, on FanDuel, we care more about touchdowns as well. And I do think Williams, just playing on the Chiefs, has probably the highest touchdown upside of those 3 guys. So he's the cheap guy I would go to. He outsnapped Jerick McKinnon 24-8 after Edwards-Helaire left last week's game. 6 opportunities for Williams to just 1 for McKinnon. So I think Williams is basically going to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire level volume. So he's a nice play at $5,200. And then on the expensive side, outside of Kareem Hunt, we should mention, I think he's a lock pretty much now with Nick Chubb out, but I like Zeke Elliott on FanDuel and cash at $8,300. Dallas has already been a run-leaning offense since that Bucs game, and I think the Pats are going to push them in that direction again, being tougher against the run than the pass. So I just think Zeke's a good volume bet, good touchdown bet with the Cowboys sporting one of the highest implied totals on the slate.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Darrell Williams gets the Clyde Edwards-Helaire role and potentially the Clyde Edwards-Helaire plus Darrell Williams role here because Jerick McKinnon has been almost non-existent in the offense to this point. And I agree with the other picks there. I will also throw in DeAndre Swift at 7,100, where you could pivot off of some higher owned guys to him, especially on the GPP side, but he's in play for cash as well. And Joe Mixon at $7,000, I think is worth considering. Probably more so a tournament play because there is some risk to his ankle, but Zach Taylor says to expect a full workload, and at $7K, it's just a good price.
Yes, I'm not going to let myself play Joe Mixon in cash. I'm not going to get hurt like that. I don't trust Zach Taylor. He was the guy telling us Mixon was going to be back all last season, and then Mixon was never back. And he only got in limited practices on Wednesday and Friday. He's listed as questionable. So I like Mixon as a tournament play a lot, but not in cash for me.
Yeah, I probably won't get to him in cash either. I think he's more of a tournament option, especially when just $100 more I can take DeAndre Swift in that same matchup. GPP side, what do you think?
I mentioned Javonte Williams on DraftKings, and I like him here for the same reason. I think he's just sandwiched between Darrell Williams and Khalil Herbert and Devontae Booker. No one's going to play Williams over those guys, and he's not going to get as many touches probably. But man, he's just really good, I think. And he's been getting 12 or so touches a game, and he gets a beatable Raiders defense. Broncos are home favorites in this game, so I think it's a spot where if you get a touchdown or two out of Javonte Williams, like he could outscore those other cheap running backs, and then you're in business because he's going to be so much lower owned than those other guys.
Yeah, I think at the very least he's a solid price pivot from those other players who are lesser talents, even if they're better bets for touch floors. There are lots of guys to choose from. Honestly, it's a little tough for me to hone in on favorites here. I do think Antonio Gibson is more interesting for a GPP lineup than he is for cash. We saw last week where they didn't need to win a game or have a good matchup for him to deliver. He carried 20 times. He scored twice, had just 60 yards. So he can have a rough game and still get the ball plenty. I don't think that they'll phase Antonio Gibson out against Kansas City, even if they fall behind. Obviously, there's some risk to him just not performing, and maybe he does lose some touches if they fall way behind. But GPP side, I think there's plenty of upside to try some Antonio Gibson. Wide receiver for cash, Jared, what do you play?
Davonte Adams is still too cheap. We said it on this show last week. Hopefully you played him. But $8,500. The guy's averaging 15 targets over his last 3 games now. So I play Adams in cash. And then you mentioned Michael Pittman on the DraftKings show. I think he's in play here too on FanDuel at $5,800. Pittman's 15th among all wide receivers in targets. He's 10th in our expected fantasy points among wide receivers. I guess the concern here is the Colts don't have to throw it a whole lot against Houston, but like when they do throw it, like Pittman's seeing 30% of this team's targets. So I still think he's a good bet for 7 or 8 targets in this game.
Yeah, I agree with that. And $5,800, I mean, you don't need him to go off. He can get 7 targets and have enough production for you at that level. I was surprised this week in looking at the Football Outsider stats that Houston is 9th in pass defense DVOA. And it's definitely something that I distrust more than I adjust any expectations for, because I don't see it holding up. 4 straight games of 6+ catches for Michael Pittman. He will definitely be central to my cash plans here, certainly in play for tournaments as well. Keenan Allen also, I think, still too cheap here at $7,100. A little bit less so when it's not full PPR, but third among wideouts and targets is opportunity, whether you're getting full points for those receptions or half. And especially if Mike Williams is out, I mean, we could see 14, 15 targets for Keenan Allen in this game.
Yeah, I think Allen is a must if Mike Williams is inactive on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Davonte Adams, you mentioned, his ownership projection looks potentially exorbitant in our lineup generator right now, but I think you can counteract that and get some Davonte Adams in a GPP lineup by stacking him with that low-owned Aaron Rodgers. And then if Davonte Adams has, this truly huge game, probably his quarterback's going to be pretty heavily involved.
Yep, like that.
Who else do you like on the GPP side?
I got DJ Moore here, $7,600, just coming off a dud. But I mean, he is still 7th among wide receivers and targets. He's 4th in expected fantasy points. Minnesota, by the numbers, they've been pretty decent against wide receivers so far. I still don't buy this as a tough matchup, and they have given up some big games to wide receivers. Jamar Chase went for 101 yards in a score. DK Metcalf had 107 yards in a score. The Vikings were the opponent when Odell Beckham was wide open all over the field and Baker Mayfield couldn't hit him. So I definitely think it's a matchup Moore could win, and he's going to be low owned coming off that disappointing week 5.
Yeah, the Vikings are, I think, a solid defense overall, where it's not surprising when they have a good game and just kind of limit the scoring, but it's not a defense to be scared of for your wide receiver matchups. They just don't have anybody frightening in coverage. So DJ Moore actually jumped out to me as well. And for all the reasons you said, he also looks like he's going to sneak in at lower ownership than he really should. 5+ receptions every game this season. He's averaging 10 targets per game, 16.5+ FanDuel points in 3 straight before that one last week. And even the dud last week still got him over 12 FanDuel points. So, it's not like he completely let us down. His team also went from being a slight favorite to a slight underdog at home. So, maybe they fall behind Minnesota here and need to throw the ball a little bit more. I like DJ Moore this week as well. Tight end for cash. I think I know the first name on my list and your list. It's that dude in Washington.
Well, I do think Travis Kelce is more interesting here. It's always easier to spend up a tight end on FanDuel. Kelce actually does check in as our top dollars per point value on FanDuel. So for me, it is either Kelce or Ricky Seals-Jones, who is really getting like top 5 tight end usage with Logan Thomas out. So you can't go wrong with either of those guys. I think it's just who do you feel better about saving some money with RSJ and using it elsewhere, or do you feel good enough playing some cheapies at the other spots and then paying up for Kelce?
Jared, I just said that dude in Washington, so how do you know I wasn't talking about Travis Kelce to begin with?
True.
But yeah, Travis Kelce, Ricky Seals-Jones, I think that's where you start with things. $5,000 for Ricky Seals-Jones. I think you start with that as the starting point as you're building the lineup, because that's, you can go that low and spend up elsewhere. And then if you have the money left over, or if you build lineups where you like some lower price guys at other positions, you get up to Travis Kelce. He did see Kelce / Darren Waller level usage last week, and he's priced at a level where it doesn't kill you even if that usage evaporates. It's tough to see it evaporating though with all of the injuries around him, even if Terry McLaurin plays. On the GPP side, I think I can see fading RSJ here because the savings aren't as extreme as they are on DraftKings, and anybody can have a rough game or get hurt. Tyler Higbee at $5,500 is interesting on FanDuel. Tight end has been a particular weak spot in coverage for the Giants so far, 23rd in coverage DVOA against the position, according to Football Outsiders to this point, 7th highest adjusted fantasy points allowed by our metric. Also the highest fantasy points allowed by our adjustments to wide receivers. So I mentioned Matthew Stafford as a tournament quarterback. I think that we might get a lower owned double stack between him, one of the higher owned wideouts, and then Tyler Higbee for touchdown upside in this matchup against the Giants. That can counter not only higher ownership on either Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods, but also some higher ownership potentially on Darrell Henderson.
Yeah, I think all these tight ends between Kelce and RSJ are interesting tournament plays because I think those guys are going to soak up so much of the ownership. So I like Higbee. I like Mark Andrews, who I talked about on the DraftKings show. Chargers have just been much tougher against wide receivers than tight ends so far. So it could be more of an Andrews game for Baltimore. Then I wanted to throw out Noah Fant too at $5,800. He's definitely seen improved usage since Albert Okwuegbunam has been out, with his injury. Fant has set season highs in route rates each of the last 2 weeks. He's been in the mid 80s. He was actually at 88% last week. And then you get this Raiders matchup. Vegas 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. They're 25th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. Have given up pretty big games to Jared Cook, to Mike Gesicki. So, Fant's been kind of quiet as far as fantasy production the past couple of weeks, but again, the usage has been there, and I do think that there's plenty of upside there.
Yeah, wide range of potential outcomes here, but that range does include leading the Broncos in targets, which we've already seen this year, so we don't even have to project that as a possibility. We know that it can happen. Defense, for me, I'm starting with the Vikings here as well as on DraftKings this week. $3,700 in salary. Sam Darnold is coming off his worst game of the season. His game before that wasn't great. Can throw lots of picks when he's playing bad, and has seen lots of pressure in, I believe he's seen 30+% pressure in 3 games this season, definitely at least 2 of the 5. So there's a chance that he gets in some sack trouble in this game against Minnesota.
Yep, Minnesota for me too in cash. I think they're even better value here than they are on DK. Interesting line movement, as you've mentioned too, in that game. It's been like a 4-point swing, from the Panthers being favorites to Minnesota being favorites now. So I don't know, maybe someone knows something we don't about, how that game's going to play out.
Mm-hmm. I think the Cowboys at 4,100 are sneaky here as well against the Patriots. 8th highest in adjusted fantasy points allowed to defenses are the Patriots. That $4,100 is just kind of tucked there in the middle, where I think people will go down to the Vikings before trusting Dallas. And then I think there's a solid chance we get Dallas jumping out to a lead on the Patriots and forcing more Mac Jones pass attempts, especially if Damian Harris doesn't play in this game where he's questionable with that rib injury.
Yeah, I like those. I think the Colts too are, it's easier to get up to them on FanDuel here, and massive home favorites against Davis Mills. I'm not buying into Davis Mills yet after last week's performance. I'll make him show it to me one more time.
You mean last week's 312 passing yards and 3 touchdowns against the number 2 at that point pass defense in DVOA?
Yeah, that guy.
I don't know. I think we're witnessing the beginning of Davis Mills' fantasy monster. Actually, no. You know what I think we saw was the Drew Lock performance from what was it, last year at Houston, where he's Drew Locking all over the place. And then that one game, it was like 310 yards and 3 touchdowns out of nowhere.
So now we're going to get the Drew Lock 3 interception performance out of Davis Mills.
Yep, Davis Mills is ready for the Drew Lock rebound. That's going to do it for this Week 6 FanDuel podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. Get more player recommendations. Kevin English has your cash game picks. Corey Bushland has your top GPP options. Then you can play around with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and the fan share ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free DraftSharks Discord. Find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. For Jared Smola and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Shaw saying thanks so much for swimming with us.